On Grand Cayman Island, one invasive species spread with incredible speed. In 2000, there were no iguanas at all. However, just a few of them appeared, and by 2018, the population skyrocketed to 1.8 million. No one helped them. And they weren't brought there in large numbers. You'll soon understand how this happened. Things have gotten so bad that authorities had to start culling the iguanas, just outright exterminating them. And this isn't an isolated case. In Florida, USA, no one raised the alarm when a couple of pet iguanas got loose. Experts estimate that today there are already several thousands of these invasive animals living in Florida. In fact, there might even be more iguanas than that. Counting them is really tricky, and it seems like their invasion can't be stopped. When an invasive species reaches such proportions, it's no longer effective to subtly ask everyone to get rid of them. Speaking of subtlety, here's an unobtrusive reminder to hit the like button. And if you never do anyway, then don't bother. So green iguanas. They're beautiful big lizards originally from Central America, all the way down to the tropical parts of South America. You can also find them on some of the eastern Caribbean islands, but not in Florida. The first sightings of green iguanas in the state date back to the 1960s, and since then their numbers have skyrocketed. It's no wonder the vast artificial canals of South Florida act as ideal pathways for them to expand into new territories. It's like they were handed express lanes, and the iguanas wasted no time in using them. And it turned out the way it did. Now the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission is urging residents of South Florida to do everything they can to help reduce the iguana population. Should authorities have thought about this sooner? Definitely. But who cares about that now, right? When the apocalypse comes, then we can start acting. But for now, we're left dealing with the consequences. And each day, those consequences get more serious. At least because each female can lay 70 eggs a year. And new populations quickly recover from culling attempts. So it turns out that green iguanas are thriving. And not just anywhere, but in a place where almost all plants and animals are invasive in their own way. That's Florida. Let me explain what I mean by that. Today, the USA tops the list of countries with the highest number of registered invasive species. New Zealand and Australia are also on the list, but the USA holds the lead by a significant margin, in both cases, including its overseas territories. As of 2016, the United States, including its overseas territories, had documented 1,071 invasive species. France, coming in second, had 927 of these species. According to recent research, by 2022, over 6,500 invasive species had been recorded in the United States alone. Their numbers are on the rise, and it's happening fast. Just think about the issues the U.S. is having with wild boars, and imagine the surprises that could be in store for people. Overall, the economic damage from invasive species and the expenses incurred in controlling them in the U.S. are estimated at $120 billion annually. This includes issues caused by both plants and animals. It's funny how this article doesn't mention humans. Well, I guess we're just presumed guilty. But if the U.S. takes the lead in invasive species, then Florida could be called the capital of invasive species. Yes, the entire state. You see, Florida tops the charts for the most invasive species. California and Illinois come next in line. Florida has more non-native reptiles and amphibians than anywhere else in the world, with one local biologist estimating that 26% of all species in the state aren't originally from there. The reason's pretty simple. Florida's warm subtropical climate and comfortable humidity levels make it a perfect home for many species. Plus, it's like a global crossroads for pet trade and food products. When you have species from almost every continent, it's inevitable that some will escape and find a new home. They settle in for good and become yet another invasive species. And I'm not kidding. Just a couple of animals sneaking out of their cages or being released by careless owners was all it took. You'd think it would take minimal effort to prevent the emergence of a new invasive species, but people miss the chance every single time. And every single time they panicked when it was already too late. Essentially, the spread of invasive species in Florida follows the same pattern that ecologists began noticing in the 20th century. At first, reports of a few exotic animals might have seemed amusing. You know those fun stories about spotting something unusual in an unexpected place, like a strange lizard? Aha, everyone chuckled and forgot about it. By the time biologists sounded the alarm, it was usually too late to stop the invaders. Most species became permanent residents in the local habitat, sometimes causing damage to ecosystems and property or spreading diseases. Sometimes it's a combination of all three. And this pattern keeps repeating year after year with all sorts of species. That's how Florida earned its reputation as the capital of invasive species. However, when it came to green iguanas, people had some arguments that seemed pretty reasonable. When these reptiles started showing up in the state, nobody paid much attention because iguanas can't handle the cold. So it seemed like they'd just freeze and that'd be that. Problem solved. But people seriously underestimated the creature. Sure, iguanas don't dig the cold because they're cold-blooded, but that hasn't stopped them from spreading all over the southern part of the state. Actually, frozen iguanas are actually quite amusing. When the temperature drops below 45 degrees Fahrenheit, they go into a sort of cold-induced stupor. It's their way of protecting themselves until it warms up to at least 50 degrees. They're still breathing and their essential functions are still running, but they can't hold on to branches. So these frozen iguanas, who prefer to sleep up high, just tumble down onto roads, cars, and unsuspecting pedestrians. Besides the fact that having an iguana fall on your head isn't exactly pleasant, their invasion spells trouble for both locals and the environment. Residents and government officials blame iguanas for wrecking gardens, damaging canals, and pushing out native species that originally inhabited Florida. Lizards also cause damage to the plants in residential and commercial landscapes, which understandably doesn't sit well with property owners. Additionally, iguanas dig holes to lay eggs, and their burrows wreak havoc on sidewalks, foundations, dams, and canal banks. These creatures also leave droppings on docks, moored boats, patios, decks, and even in swimming pools. Not exactly a pleasant surprise. In Bahia Honda State Park, an iguana is being accused of munching on a rare plant called Juliandina bonduc, which is home to the endangered Miami blue butterfly. And these butterflies are critically endangered, by the way? It's a similar story unfolds with some local species of tree snails. They're also facing extinction, and they suffer directly from the actions of iguanas. These lizards simply devour them, despite being primarily herbivorous. Just like other reptiles, green iguanas can pass on the infectious salmonella bacteria to humans through contact with water or surfaces contaminated by their feces. Considering contamination happens everywhere, they're definitely not the neighbors you hoped for. Now imagine stumbling upon a potentially infectious animal, not in your garden, but right in your toilet at home. And this isn't just a one-time thing. However, iguanas also suffer from invasive species themselves, though far beyond Florida's borders. Let's go to one of the Galapagos Islands. 2 centuries ago, the Galapagos land iguana, a large lizard from the iguana family, inhabited this place. However, the species completely disappeared. The last person to see this iguana on Santiago Island in Ecuador was Charles Darwin back in 1835. When an expedition from California arrived in 1906, the iguanas were already gone. It was all because of invasive species brought to the island by humans. Wild pigs, cats, goats, and donkeys caused immense damage to the ecosystem, depriving iguanas of food, and eventually eating the iguanas themselves. For nearly 2 centuries, this species of iguana was thought to be extinct on Santiago Island, but recently efforts have been made to revive the population. In 2019, 3,000 individuals were reintroduced there. If ecologists' estimates are correct, the return of these iguanas should have a positive impact on the ecosystem. On this same island, there are equally unique marine iguanas, and there's a serious risk they might disappear too because of invasive species brought by humans. Scientists call this behavior ecological naivete, because marine iguanas simply haven't developed effective strategies to deal with introduced species. For instance, the first dogs were brought to the Galapagos Islands over 100 years ago. But marine iguanas still haven't figured out what to do about them. Dogs just eat the iguanas, and that's that. Natural land predators of this iguana include the Galapagos hawk, short-eared owl, lava gull, herons, and Galapagos racer snakes. Marine iguanas learned how to deal with them. When in danger, one tactic they use is to freeze in place to avoid being spotted, especially by blind snakes. But with invasive species like pigs and cats, freezing doesn't cut it. It actually makes iguanas even more vulnerable. It's like taking a step closer to extinction. While efforts are underway to save iguanas on the Galapagos Islands, in Florida, they're trying to save everything else from iguanas. In recent years, these creatures have become such a nuisance that it's now recommended to have professionals remove and capture iguanas to prevent the situation from getting even worse. Different experts suggest different strategies. For instance, you can tweak the animal's habitat to discourage it from sticking around. Or you could try what they call humane harassment, removing plants that attract iguanas, filling in holes, hanging wind chimes, or other gadgets that make intermittent noises. Iguanas don't dig them. Shiny surfaces also scare off, and if iguanas keep coming back, the suggestion is to spray them with water. Of course, there are more drastic measures. As non-native reptiles, green iguanas aren't protected in Florida, except by laws against cruelty, meaning they can be humanely killed on private property with the landowner's permission. They can also be caught and humanely killed year-round without a permit or hunting license on 32 public lands in South Florida. Maybe because iguanas appear relatively harmless compared to, say, wild boars, some hunters feel conflicted. Essentially, the main offense of iguanas is thriving in the ecosystem we humans created for them. Does this mean that a hunter killing iguanas is helping restore Florida's ecology, or is he simply adding to his list of prey? Even pet green iguanas in Florida are now illegal. They were added to the banned species list in April 2021. Since then, people can't keep iguanas as pets anymore, even if they really want to. Of course, those who already had iguanas when the law passed shouldn't kill their pets, but they need to make sure their pets are tagged with a tracking device. NBC6 South Florida, a local TV station, ranked iguanas among the top 3 scariest invasive species in Florida. The second spot went to the Burmese python, a species we've talked about before, and in third place, peacocks. Wait, what? Why? Firstly, peacocks aren't native to South Florida. They come from Sri Lanka, other parts of Asia, and even Africa. Yet these birds freely roam some areas of Florida and are pretty common sights. They just live. Additionally, for about 20 years, efforts have been made to protect birds from killing or trapping in South Florida. Why? There was no practical benefit from peacocks. People simply like beautiful birds. It's like peacocks add charm to the places where people live. It's easy to guess what happened next. Peacocks started breeding like crazy. Take a stroll around Wadeview Park in Orlando, and you'll spot peacocks everywhere. In trees, on lawns, on roofs, and even crossing the road. They pretty much own the neighborhood. Good luck trying to argue with that. For decades, people have been nearly powerless against the invasion of peacocks. At first, it was more or less fine. The numbers were tolerable, and everyone was mostly fine or at least not too upset. But over the past decade, the peacock population has skyrocketed by at least 10 times. In some areas, there are already hundreds of them. Most people see one peacock and think, wow, cool. 2, still nice. But when you got a bunch of these birds, they take up a lot of space, get really aggressive, and fiercely defend their turf. And yeah, peacocks are convinced that humans are a threat to their nests, so they feel the need to attack. Basically, they've been causing trouble for a while, but people close their eyes to it because peacocks are so gorgeous. People were willing to tolerate the damage to their property, the piles of droppings, and the noisy mating calls that sound like cats meowing into bullhorns. Peacock cries are seriously something else. They're incredibly, really loud. Just one squawking peacock is enough to be annoying. Now picture 100 of them. And these hundreds of birds contaminate sidewalks, driveways, patios, making them quite slippery, leading to unfortunate accidents related to peacock poop. Slipping on that and breaking something is really frustrating. Plus, peacocks attack their reflection in car doors or windows because they think they're seeing a rival. This leads to scratches, beak marks, and upset car owners. So finally, they started dealing with those beautiful birds. The simplest and most obvious idea was to catch them, but the problem was, once caught, there was simply nowhere to put all these peacocks. They're so out of place that relocating them to a suitable area isn't an option. Zoos don't need peacocks, and releasing them back makes no sense, so euthanasia is the only option left. But this is a quite disheartening option, so they decided to perform vasectomies on peacocks to prevent the population from increasing even more. They've even hired a vet to carry out the procedure. At the end of last year, authorities were also planning to bring on a special hunter to respond to residents' complaints, catch peacocks that were causing a ruckus, and take them to the vet clinic. You might wonder why they go for a vasectomy instead of neutering, like with cats and dogs. Isn't that easier? Well, it turns out scientists have thought this through. By making males sterile through vasectomy, you prevent the breeding potential of up to 10 females, because males are polygamous. It's actually simpler than sterilizing each female individually. Simply neutering peacocks would lower their testosterone levels, preventing them from dominating, attracting females, and living a normal peacock life. With vasectomy, all these behaviors remain intact, just without any increase in population. Actually, nobody knows if this program will actually work because it seems to be the first of its kind in history. But people have no choice but to coexist with wild animals, both local ones like alligators and sharks, and invasive ones like pythons, iguanas, and peacocks. It's just a new way to deal with an old problem. After all the old ways haven't really helped. All right, that'd be one thumbs up. See you later.